All right, good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, and that means if it's hurricane season, it's time to track the tropics from Central Florida. I'm West 2 First Warning meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson. Good morning, Eric.
Hey, Jeremy, good morning, buddy. You guys had some decent storms up that way yesterday.
It's been crazy. I would say Saturday evening and then yesterday, these thunderstorms have just been parked over Savannah. And that time, some locations have had over 6 inches of rain. I know at my house, some measured totals in at least my neighborhood about 5.5 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had some flooding issues here. And then people were asking me, like, well, how's this tied into maybe your longer range forecast? And I go, well, you know what? This was highlighted for my area, kind of that Northeast Gulf into
Yeah.
the Southeast, because we had the 19th to the 25th of July. And I was like, well, it's not a tropical system, but it's delivering tropical rains.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, though, in the Atlantic Basin, our lull continues, which we're not going to complain about.
Right, right. As a matter of fact, we take a look at the satellite imagery, and all is fairly quiet, and it's considerably quiet thanks to some Saharan dust that's kind of moved into the area, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, you do look out there on the IR and you see some clusters of showers and thunderstorms that, I mean, at least have the look of being kind of impressive, but they are fighting that dusty, dry air.
Right, right. And that dusty, dry air has moved into the United States. I know that for my area, we've dropped air quality a little bit here because of that. But at least for now, what it's doing is it's keeping these little pieces of energy out in the Atlantic fairly subdued, which I don't think anybody's arguing much about.
No, so I mean, the National Hurricane Center is still looking pretty quiet for the next 7 days. Hopefully that holds true. And then we'll be into August.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, into August, Jeremy, we talked about this a little bit off camera, but we think that getting into August, the pattern is really going to ramp up. Activity is going to start going and going and going.
Yeah, so August, hey, that's kind of starts peak of season, especially mid-August through about the early part of October. Climatologically, that's when you get the bulk of the name storms. Heading into August, though, we're going to start getting back into a more active part of the pattern, and that could be really during the first week we could see something develop. And I know in a little bit we'll talk more about it, but there could be a very active 3 to 3.5 week stretch.
Well, and to that point, also there's a lot that plays in. We can talk about the long range forecast, we can talk about computer models, but I think that when we look at the broader stroke, Jeremy, the Madden-Julian oscillation is really a big part of that. Do you want to explain what it is a little bit, and then I can kind of take a
Oh,
deeper dive?
yeah. So I mean, we have the our cycling pattern that we use, LRC, that kind of gives us a heads up, longer range. We're able to identify the pattern in the fall. But that's just one cycle. There's different cycles that go on in the atmosphere. So Eric mentioned Madden-Julian oscillation. And really, if you can, once that different phases of that line up over parts of the Atlantic basin, that can help to boost tropical activity. So we'll start to get into a little more favorable part of that. And
Yeah.
then we have some of these systems recycling. So all this should start to come together in August.
Right. So one way that we can actually look at kind of when you're in phase and when you're out of phase is by, interestingly enough, looking like 3/4 of the way up the atmosphere. Looking, it's the 200 millibar level, which means that there's only 20% of atmosphere still over your head. And so just by looking at this on a global scale, okay, the easiest way to see this is green means you've got the setup for lift and spin and tropical activity. The brown means you've kind of got that subdued bit. Now, I've got it on the world view, okay? And I'll bring this full screen for you just for perspective purposes, right? But when you see this, notice that as of right now, and this is the American GFS model, you can very clearly see the entire Atlantic just about is brown. There is down into the southern hemisphere a little bit of green, which would make sense why we're seeing some of those little waves out there. But we're really quite closed off. We're not really wanting to have any kind of that lifting mechanism per se over the Atlantic basin. But watch through time. I would think that later this week we could see a couple more waves coming off the coast of Africa that may try to look healthy, but based on kind of the MJO and how it's favored, doesn't look like the, getting to the Caribbean is really going to be open for business. But look what happens here. The very end of July into August, we start to see the phasing adjust so that the Gulf of Mexico, the southeastern United States, and the Caribbean Sea start to show some of that green. That, Jeremy, we know is a little bit of added lift, a little bit of spin. And that's when we could start to see not necessarily these Atlantic waves developing, but more kind of once they get closer to home, like these homegrown deals, we may start to see some feistiness down that direction.
Yeah, green on this map definitely is not good because it's just sort of adding an increased chance that if we get one of these lows or clusters of thunderstorms, that they may start to develop a little bit more into something, maybe an area of interest or a tropical system. So we'll be watching that. But yeah, as Eric is mentioning here, we head into different phases of the MJO. Um, I know some people have said, well, the method you use is sort of just the MJO. Well, I don't think I've really seen many people that they'll show you the phase that's favorable for the MJO and then identify specific systems. And so what we're doing is really identifying the specific parts of the pattern, but certainly we look at all kinds of different things. Obviously, the MJO, other people are big into ENSO, El Nino, La Nina, and we're also transitioning more to La Nina now, which can help to produce some favorable winds in the upper levels, the mid and upper levels that may help to enhance some tropical development. So there's a lot going on. I always say I always just try to stick with what I know best and the methods that have worked for me historically, but we definitely look at everything.
Yeah, and I think that that's good. The saying of "see the forest through the trees" really is important. I think in meteorology because there's so many levels to the atmosphere. There's so much to look at and kind of try to figure out how it all ties together. Jeremy, we know water temperatures certainly sufficient. They did come down a little bit thanks to Beryl. Roared
Mm-hmm.
through the Caribbean as a Category 5 storm, but to that extent, when we look at the water temperatures, and I'm just going to pull up the anomaly numbers here, but they're still kind of historically warm on a broad scale of sorts. So when we look at that, they're all above average, no matter where you look at
Mm-hmm.
in the basin. So I do think that once we kind of get that Madden-Julian oscillation back in phase to give that spin, to give that atmospheric lift, and start getting those waves and calm down the Saharan dust. I mean, I think we'll be into open season there.
Right. And then once we get into, I would say the first week of August, we'll start to have to watch these very closely. And I mentioned it on air when I was on last night during our
Yeah.
11 p.m. newscast. I did sort of a breakdown and I said, once this kicks in, maybe the very start of August or early August, you're going to have that 3 to 3.5 week window, which for us, we had it going through about August 26th. So once it gets going through about August 26th,
Right.
and you're like, well, that's the whole month. Well, it just so happens that falls kind of squarely on that about 3.5 week window. So some busy stretches in there. And unfortunately, once again, I think there will be an exposure that opens up to somewhere along the U.S. coastline.
Well, and I mean, tis the season, right? Like that's kind of the fun. We're getting into the climatological part of the season where things should start ramping up, and our pattern dictates it. We're starting to see hints of the Madden-Julian oscillation opening up. So, Jeremy, should we take a couple of minutes to just kind of look at the models as they stand this morning?
Yeah. Do you want to go over where we're at currently? I know you were making those graphics right
Oh,
before
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
show a number of name storms, kind of where we're at. And
Yep.
then we can also put into a little perspective here, sort of historically to some of the more active years and how we're shaping up
Yeah.
compared to those. So, three named storms so far last year. At this point, we had five. Average is 2.4. So now with our lull here, at least in terms of named storms, and there's other metrics we'll talk about in maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But named storms were pretty much right on target.
Right, right. Now, last year was busy. We know that 2020 was busy. We know 2005. These were seasons that were busier. So it's one of those things where we always had a feeling that transitioning off of El Nino to La Nina would really load up the back half of the season. And so, at least as of right now, um, we're kind of where we had expected. And Jeremy, you and I put out our long range forecast. I don't think that any of this has been a complete surprise thus far. Yeah.
Right. I guess I would say the one surprise, and that's for any single person, is to get to the Category 5 that early in the
Sure.
season.
Yeah.
I would say that's the one surprise, but other than that, I think everything is kind of churning along here, as our forecast indicated.
Yeah.
Um, if people are curious, 2020, by the end of July, there were 9 named storms. And in 2005, a busy season, especially down your way, um, I think that had 7.
Yeah. I think so.
So
Yeah.
maybe we'll sneak one in here before the end of July. Sometimes these things can spin up pretty quickly, so we're not
Yeah.
going to say no to that. But say we even have one and we're at 4, still trailing quite a bit. But
Right.
this is a number that, uh, let's see here, we're above average. And then once we get to the ace, we're also definitely above average.
Right, right. So let's look. So for the year, we'd had 11 and 3/4 days where we were tracking a system. The average for the 30 years is 7.2. Beryl was a long storm, so we certainly had plenty of time tracking that. Last year through today, we'd had 19 days with a named system. So, again, we're running a little bit slower than last year. We had figured that that would be the case. Ace, though, is very different because Beryl had been so strong for so long. We've generated 36.1 ace points. The 30-year average through today is 8, and last year we'd had 15. So, Beryl being a category 5, being so strong, being so long duration, certainly we generated more ace points than perhaps a normal season. But, we've been in a little bit of a lull, Jeremy. I think, though, that the back half of the season, we're definitely going to, pump up the volume, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the A score got that. I mean, obviously that huge boost for the Category 5, and that was like a 13-day
Right.
name system. So, I mean, just think about that. That's basically where all our name days came from. And also, for a big part of it, it was a major hurricane. And then it weakened briefly, and then it was a hurricane at landfall. So we've had one landfall so far as a hurricane for the
Right.
U.S. As we go through August here, I think, I mean, there is almost no question that in terms of name storms,
Yeah.
probably even the ace for August will end up above average. And we can, I guess, get into some of the longer range stuff now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's start with the models, right? Let's just kind of get an
Yeah.
idea of where they're at, and then Jeremy,
Yep.
you can take the CFS model. So this is the GFS, okay, Global
Right.
Forecast System. So right off the bat, what we're looking at here is normalized anomaly. So sea level pressures, the oranges, the warmer shades, that's going to be higher pressure. The blue shades, that's going to be lower pressure. So no surprise here. This is the most recent run. Lots of high pressure, the atmosphere not wanting to develop any kind of tropical stuff. But notice, as we look into the timestamps in the top right corner. So this is Saturday, the 27th of July, 2 p.m. or 18Z. But you can kind of see a little piece of energy, a little piece of low pressure up near St. Croix, out near the Virgin Islands in Puerto Rico, an area of not necessarily low pressure, but a couple of little pieces of energy that are kind of sneaking on through and heading, interestingly enough, around Cuba, around South Florida. It's shown in white, so it's not very low pressure there, Jeremy, but it's at least a hint, perhaps, that there may be something that we'll have to watch a little closer to home in that time frame there.
Yeah. And I think I mean, obviously these models, when they're this far out, they'll flip flop around a little bit. But this particular one was showing towards the end of the run, maybe something trying to get going, which would be very late July, more like August. I believe, what was that, about August 2nd to
Yeah, yeah,
3rd or
yeah. That's
4th?
August 2nd / August 3rd, kind of taking that little piece from South Florida, ramping it over into the Gulf, and then looping it up toward, like the mouth of the Mississippi, give or take. Again, one model run of one model,
Right.
not a forecast.
One thing I will say, and as we go through some of these different parts where we show, hey, the models are showing some development. Well, we had August 5th to 12th for the Northeast Gulf or the Southwestern Atlantic. So um, the fact that the GFS may be trying to at least sniff something out very close to that time frame, it'll be worth watching down the road. Nothing to worry about right now. And then we also have other models that go out even farther, and they have pretty consistently for the middle part of August started to show a huge ramp up in activity over the main development region.
Yeah.
These could be some of those systems that come off as tropical waves off from the west coast of Africa
Yep.
and then develop somewhere over the Atlantic. So we may be having systems once again that were tropical systems where we're tracking over the open water. I always like to say those don't sneak up on people. Those
Right.
are ones that it's like a marathon tracking those.
Right. So let's just take a look while we're chatting, Jeremy. So I've popped up the CFS model, which is the super long range model, and I'm going to run. But why don't you talk
Right.
about what I'm running through here?
Okay. So what we look at here, and obviously this is a model that goes out 700 plus hours. So not looking for the finer details. We're kind of looking at if our thoughts in the model are starting to line up, and maybe it shows a little more activity in there. And it definitely starts to. So if you can kind of go through the dates, I can't see the dates on
Yeah.
my end, but I believe this is more like mid-August,
Yeah, that's
right?
August 18th in the morning there.
Okay, so and that's showing at least two pretty healthy looking lows. And again, this isn't like a super high resolution model that you're looking at. So the fact is picking these up. Again, don't focus on the exact placement. I would focus more on it has this activity and it is also in sort of those windows where we said, hey, these are timeframes we really have to watch out for.
Yeah.
So we had August again, 5th to 12th, more like Gulf, Southwest Atlantic, and then coming up around August 18th, 26th, and again, these are dates that we put out on March the 1st. We had August 18th to 26th. That is where there's been multiple lows. So think of that a little bit like the barrel part of the pattern. Barrel kind of started it, and then we did see another one or two lows. So that's really one of the more signature parts of the pattern that we've identified, and one that could have one, two systems at least.
Right. Right. And with the CFS kind of showing a couple of systems in that time frame, again, you're way out in terms of timing, but using all the
Right.
resources that we have, again, as Jeremy said, not focusing on the finer granular detail, but rather just pattern starting to pick up, pattern more favorable for formation, pattern favorable for some impacts, perhaps. I think that these are good opportunities for us to at least pay close attention and watch kind of how this plays out, right?
Yeah, I just think it's great though because we put our forecast out March the 1st. It's out there, people can look at it, and then we get into the season, and these things sort of just start to fall into place
Right.
once again. So, um, yeah, August definitely I think is going to be busy.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Both climatologically and the overall pattern favoring it. So, all right. So, questions, comments, concerns from everybody. Because, we listen, we understand our forecasts are not going to be absolutely perfect. Got it. But also, when you see these trends going, it's just another tool. We've put our forecast together, looking at the long range models, looking at patterns. The lull that we've been enjoying is not going to last for forever. And we know this. Colorado State University forecasting busy stuff, NOAA forecasting busy stuff. And even though our long range forecast, Jeremy, has been lower per se, we're forecasting a busy back half of the season.
Yeah, that was never a question. We were forecasting above average activity. And even when you're forecasting like 20 named storms, that is one of the busiest seasons on record. It's like what, a top like five, I think, in
Right.
terms of named storms or something very close to
Yeah.
that. 2020 was the most with around 30, I believe. That was the year we got into the Greek alphabet and sort of broke the Greek alphabet, and then they came
Yep.
out with the supplemental storm nameless, which I think maybe for the first time ever, will there's a chance we could dip into that this year.
Hey, I mean, the idea of retiring a Greek letter was Greek to us, and then we
Right.
ended up having to do it. Mike's pointing out, and I don't think that that's wrong. Mike says, kind of scary that at the end of that model, it's showing five lows really close together. Now, obviously, we know Fujiwara and all these other elements there. But yeah, it's at least letting you know that the tropics are going to pick up. And then, of course, we get into September. We get into the peak of hurricane season. And that's not
Yeah,
even
the actual
showing up
peak,
yet.
I think the actual peak is on like the 10th,
Yep. Yep.
something like that. But keep in mind, it's not. I don't think it is going to be something where it's like it's this 3.5 week stretch of super active weather. And then, oh my gosh, we have like 4+ weeks of super active in September. Probably going to at some point catch another lull. Maybe we get a little more dust in place. As you were pointing out, the MJO not as favorable.
Yeah.
But then, especially later September, maybe that very first part of October, we get one more round of this before the new pattern sets up,
Yep.
where that real active stretch would come back very sometime in late September, and then right at the start of October. So potentially that window opens up a couple more times this hurricane season.
Yeah.
So I think we'll definitely be earning our money here in the
Let's
next 2 months.
let's just enjoy the vacation that we have right now. That's for sure. Um, any questions from anybody? Questions, comments, concerns? Terry had mentioned September's always been busy for hurricanes. Yeah, we had talked about that, and I think that it's at least interesting to show this, Jeremy. We haven't shown it yet today, but like we are. What? It's July the 23rd. So when you look at the calendar here, it July the 20th. We're literally at the bottom of the mountain looking up at it. That's where we're at
Right.
right now.
Yeah, we had the Category 5 storm. I think in some people's minds, they thought, oh my gosh, because they just heard busy, 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 busy season. And once Beryl occurred and it was a major hurricane, some people thought, well, it's just going to be like this now
Right.
through probably mid-October.
Right.
Well, that's definitely not the case, and we're thankful it's not.
Right.
But now we're going to get back into sort of that similar part of the pattern. So we'll see the activity ramp up, and then once they form, it's all about sort of where they track. If they could just spin out into the open Atlantic, that would be great.
Yeah.
But I really feel like that was a little bit more last year's pattern.
Yep.
All those storms kind of went either side of Bermuda.
Yeah.
This year, that high is actually shifted a little bit more to the west.
Right.
So some of these, we already saw that they got guided across the Caribbean, Yucatan. Even if that high is slightly off to the east, then they would
Well,
start curving north.
that they call that the ridge over troubled water. It
Yep.
blocks that recurvature path, and so because of that, it puts the United States more into play. Adam over on YouTube says it was interesting to see Beryl made it through a not so favorable MJO. I believe the MJO was very favorable for Beryl, if memory
Yeah.
serves.
Yeah. I think it was, but again, don't quote me on
Right.
that. Maybe the beginning or tail end of it was a little bit different. I know we started to get a little dusty air in towards the end
Yeah.
of Beryl,
Yeah.
which remember it had that trailing wave
Yes.
that
And the
looked like it
dust.
was going to develop.
Right.
That never really did. So the fact that that CFS model is trying to get maybe two or three lows going at the same time, lining up with that part of the pattern that we know is going to recycle, that really shows that I think that part of the pattern,
That's the big
that
part.
one this year, that one means business.
Well, and Beryl was the upper low on the earlier patterns. The second low is the
Hmm.
surface low. The dust got the surface low, which is why Beryl ended up being what it
Yeah.
was, which, um, flicked our long range hotspot for a minute, but we're not perfect. We understand that. Mike on your page is asking, should I worry about a category 4 in the Outer Banks this year?
Um, I think I would say it's tough to get some of those that strong up that way. I don't
Yeah.
know the last time that the Outer Banks was hit with a major hurricane, but I
Right.
think everyone, we say this all the time, it's cliche, but you have to be prepared.
Right. Yeah. I think.
So I mean, if it's look at Houston, it was not category 4, but a category 1, and that still did a lot of damage. People were without power
Yeah.
for 2+ weeks in spots.
It was a significant hit. And I think that in terms of cost, even though it was a category 1, that'll be one of the more significant hits that the Houston Metroplex has seen, right?
Right. And then last year, I mean, obviously we had Idalia that did some damage along your coast down there, but it was a major hurricane lifting to the northeast, came into my area, and in the grand scheme of things, didn't really do much in terms of wind. So
Yeah.
these things are kind of have a mind of their own.
Yeah.
And when it comes to impacts, each of them are vastly different, and it really depends upon which side of the storm you get in.
Right.
Some of them can weaken super fast, where Beryl was probably, as it approached Texas was strengthening versus weakening. So strengthening systems at landfall really never a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. We'll see the next few months, that's for sure. All right. Do you have anything else, my friend? Otherwise, it's kind of quitting time.
Yeah, I would say next time we talk, though, in another week, we're going to have a much better idea of what's coming down in August, and hopefully we can just keep this law going as long as we can.
Yeah.
Uh, Maybe get a big fan and blow more of that dusty dry air off from the Sahara,
If only it was that easy. And just to
right?
add, by the way, once we get into like some significant storms, significant threats, Jeremy and I won't just do Tuesdays. Like we'll
Right,
pop in more and more as is needed. And I'm happy because thus far since we've done this, you haven't had a threat, which, like, knock on wood, we were in Hurricane
right.
Idalia coverage last year, and my management was like, yeah, get off the air. They put somebody else on TV so that I could come do this. So I'm also happy
Good.
and grateful. My management. So Mr. Ben up there at WJCL, if Jeremy needs to do this, pull him off the air for a half an hour. No, let's hope not
Right.
any of that happens.
No, Ben is who is the general manager at WJCL, is a huge fan of tracking the tropics. He's a regular viewer, so I know he loves weather.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things though. I really love this venue, and as things get more and more active, we will be doing this more and more as is needed. So I think that's it. You got it.
Yep, I think that is it for this week.
All right, very good. Well, listen, thank you all for joining us. Let's keep this lull going from Central Florida. I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
Chat with you later, buddy.
All right, see ya.